Мне на $10 24-го, Сузи. Ложись на пол, болван. Слышал?
As a kid of the early 2000s growing up in a post-Soviet country, this was how I used to watch Western films and cartoons. It was just one guy dubbing all the characters in his mom's basement while you were trying to guess who was speaking and being distracted by the original English dialogue which you could still hear in the background. But how did the Russian voice acting industry come to that point, considering that Soviet dubbing was renowned for being one of the best in the world before the USSR collapsed?
Очень хорошо, благодарю вас. Очень хорошо. Не мне. Вы себе аплодируете.
Initially, only the Soviet elite could enjoy foreign films, which were translated live in movie theaters. After all, they needed to watch what those pesky capitalist pigs were doing on the other side of the Iron Curtain for research purposes, and definitely not for fun. But it wasn't long before more people got access to those movies, starting from The Invisible Man in 1935, the first foreign film to be dubbed in the USSR.
Чего вы трясетесь, Кэмп? Вы никогда не отличались храбростью, не так?
Perhaps due to political reasons, I dare say maybe even because of one specific man who ruled the Soviet Union for a few decades with an iron fist, there wasn't much of a dubbing industry in the country until the 50s. The flow of imported movies was heavily controlled, but it was enough for dubbing to develop and even gradually become an art of its own. The intention wasn't merely to provide just a translation for the audience anymore, but for the actor to give new life to the characters on screen. Sure, syncing was important, but the main focus was bringing out the right emotion out of a scene. Dubbing wasn't necessarily used just with artistic intent, but also to adjust the dialogue for local needs. One reason, of course, is that some jokes and references had to be adapted to be understood, but it was also a means to control and cut out what the regime didn't want people to hear. I should also mention that dubbing wasn't only limited to translating foreign films. All Soviet and post-Soviet kids will remember the uniquely charming voices of their favorite Russian cartoons.
Слышу.
In live action, local Soviet productions were usually redubbed after filming to correct parts of the dialogue, improve the vocal performance, or even replace it. Sometimes directors wanted an actor for the way they looked and acted on screen, but wanted a different voice, and it was common practice in the industry. By the 70s and early 80s, the Soviet dubbing industry was at its peak, praised as one of the best even abroad. And then, more and more freedom in the slowly opening Soviet Union eventually broke the country, leaving it without money for basic necessities, let alone the film industry. It was while the country was opening up that the iconic monotone-voiced man started translating all the movies.
Очень приятно с вами познакомиться, по-немецки говорит. Нет, мы сейчас будем по-английски говорить. То же самое сказал по-английски.
At first, it started as a means for people to illegally watch foreign films that were not allowed in the country, but it became the prevalent way for Russians to experience foreign cinema even at home on VHS. VCR players were, of course, incredibly expensive and hard to get at first, and if you somehow managed to get your hands on that imported technology, you better not be caught by the police watching foreign films at home. But Soviet audiences hungry for a peek at Western entertainment were undeterred. Small underground venues where foreign films were screened didn't have to hide anymore, and even became so popular that everybody ditched the regular movie theaters. The man that dubbed all these movies worked on dozens of them every week in a small room at home, often on the first try, attempting to catch up with every character. In fact, sometimes they would keep speaking even when the scene was over. Syncing and emotion just weren't a concern.
You can't put words in Pudgy's mouth if his mouth isn't moving.
What's voiceover? It's an interior monologue. Maybe even the voice of God. That's even better.
Actors.
But this rudimentary practice did its job once you got used to it, and these translators even became famous as a nostalgic part of many people's childhoods in the 80s, 90s, and even early 2000s. Not many of these men had acting experience, although there were a few like the Soviet actor and stuntman Vasily Gorchakov. Otherwise, most were just professional translators, scholars, or cinephiles. Even if the lost art of Russian dubbing made its comeback in the early 2000s with new emerging talent, a very short but nostalgic period of Soviet and Russian film history still lives on in Russian-speaking viewers' minds. In fact, many of the movies that were translated at the time still haven't been properly redubbed, and the only way to experience them in Russian is thanks to the translators of the 80s. So if you're a real cinephile, it's never too late to start learning Russian and experience the charm of 1980s Soviet dubbing for yourself.